Lost Good. And your brother and sister, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sir, where were you born?
In Mena, Arkansas.
And when's your birthday?
18th of December.
18.
Yeah, born 94.
1894. When's your birthday?
The 21st of July, and I was born in 1906.
And where were you born?
On the place down here, 2 miles east of Slapcow.
Who is your mother?
Uh,
Your mother, what was her name?
just Viola. Viola.
What was her maiden name?
Jennings.
Jennings. And what was your father's name?
John Cooper.
Where were they from, your parents? Where did they come from?
Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
When did they come to Oklahoma?
We moved to Oklahoma in 1901.
What part?
Down in that Altus area.
Altus.
Yeah.
How'd you travel to Oklahoma? How'd you come?
Wagons.
Tell me about the trip.
Well, it took a long time. I think we hit a bunch of rainy weather. I really don't know how far it would be just straight across country from Mena to Altus, but I think we were on the road 19 or 20 days. We were tied up some, but they're just trails. There wasn't hardly any roads.
What did you pack in the wagons to bring with you?
Well, just a little furniture, not a lot, and clothing. And I think we had one load of down there. We had a lot of fruit and vegetables and whatnot that we'd canned. You know, I think they had a load of that stuff. I'm not sure, about 3 wagons, I think.
How did your mother cook on the road?
I think just on an open campfire.
What about sleeping accommodations? Where'd you sleep?
Oh, I think we had a tent. We put up some of the, in bad weather, put a tent up, and in nice weather, just make a bed down on the ground.
Now, how'd you know where you were going? If there were no roads or?
Well, just general direction. You just went west, it was just about straight west, say, from the 2 points.
So you had figured that you're going to come to Altus.
Yeah.
So you just.
Yeah.
Was
We now
was there 2 of Dad's brothers came the same time you did?
there was one.
One.
One. We come through Fort Sill, and we stopped at the army post there, you know, and they said, well, this is payday, and Dad wanted to go on out a little ways and camp, and they made us camp there. Said these Indians got paid off, and they said they might just, you know, they said their honor is the devil. So we stayed. I can remember that. I'd have been about, what, 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. Do you remember Fort Sill at that time?
Yeah.
Tell me what it looked like.
Well, you know, I went down there and worked after I got out of the Army in World War I. And part of it hadn't changed at all. The business was all handled from a center out there that they called the Red Store. There was a big building there, and then there were some houses, and later one of those houses was used to house the big Indian chief.
Geronimo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was there a long time, but I think he got to be kind of a pest or a pet, I don't know. But it wasn't very big.
Did you ever see Geronimo out there?
Don't think so. Now I can remember I worked for a funeral home after I went down there in 21, and I buried an old boy that I'd visited with him, and he had run this Red Store way back there, and when Geronimo was there. But I don't remember ever seeing Geronimo. But he said that he'd have been there when we come through if we'd have just to look for it.
So you were on the road, you say 18, 19 days?
19 days, yeah.
And then, what time of year were you traveling?
I think it was in the fall. just pretty well in the fall of the year.
And how many wagons were in the group?
There were 3. Yeah, it seemed to me like we had 3 wagons, and then we had what we'd call a spring wagon or a 2-seated affair, you know, that mostly just held the kids, maybe some bedding and whatnot.
And where'd you all live when you came to Altus?
You know, I can remember the last place where we raised a crop a couple of years, but I can't remember. We was over west there somewhere, and we must not have stayed there very long, so I don't have much recollection of it. But we got a place then 4 miles north and a mile east of Altus, and we raised a cotton crop, good cotton crop, big stuff. The fall that we came up here, and Dad used to brag about that he had $500 in his pocket when we moved up here, and that was something unheard of. I think we had grown 20 bales of cotton, and that was about what we got for it.
Tell me about cotton farming. You ever pick cotton?
Oh yeah, when I was a little tiny kid, I could pick about 50 pounds when I was about 7, 8 years old.
50 pounds in a day?
Yeah, just a little sack, but every little bit helped.
Yeah.
We'd pick a wagon load, all us kids and then the neighbors, and it took Dad all day to go to town to the gin, you know, and get it gin. He was on the road all the time, and we'd pick him up to keep him going.
Where was the gin?
In Altus.
Altus.
And yeah, we was about 4 miles or 4.5, I think, from the location of the gin.
Were you near the town of Martha?
Yeah, I've heard of it a lot, but I'm not right sure that I was ever at Martha.
Okay, I think it's the north of Altus.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where one of our cousins taught school.
Yeah, but I don't know that, you know, that was over east of where we lived, and I'm not sure that I ever was over there.
How come your folks moved to Oklahoma from Arkansas?
Well, the rest of the Goodners had already moved out here. There was 3, my grandfather and 3 brothers of Dad's had already, that would have been the Greer County opening, I think.
Okay, was that the Great Lottery of 1901?
Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And they got, you see, Uncle Burke, Uncle Joe, Uncle Ross, and Granddad, I think, all got claims. But Dad didn't go. We had, where we lived in Arkansas, I think we had 40 acres, you know, which had a pretty good sized vineyard and a pretty good orchard, you know, and then it seemed to me like he did freighting of some kind, maybe he had a bunch of mules. And so we didn't come out for that. But then the minute they opened this up here, why, he was hot to come up here.
Did he get a claim?
He come up here in the summer of 1903, and he looked around out in the east end of the county, and I don't know whether he ever saw the place where we finally got, but he goes back by Woodward. Somebody told him to go to Woodward, that there was a lawyer down there that would get him a place. So he goes back by Woodward, and an old boy said for $50, so buy you on the 160 acres there. And so they come on back home, and about a month later he decided we ought to come up and make some sort of sign that we was going to live on it or something. And we come up, and I come with him that time, and we come up there in a wagon. And there was a few people lived down there, that 2 or 3 ranchers said, don't put nothing on there, don't build a shack, nothing, somebody will steal it. Said, just leave it alone. So we went back then, and we didn't quite get up within the 6 months allotted to, you know, to make res, but then nobody paid any attention to it anyhow. And we started up here, I don't know, 2 or 3 days before the first. It took 9 days to come from Altus up here. Well, we got caught in a snowstorm at Shattuck.
Tell him what Mama said when you got in Shattuck.
Have you ever been to Shattuck?
No.
going to in the Shattuck from the east, you kind of come up over a rolling hill, and so they decided to pull the horses up and stop them on the top of the hill and breathe them. And Mama was sitting up on the wagon seats, you know, and this town was just lined up down there, and she swore she could count 13 saloon signs.
So she was about ready to go back.
Stop there. No, that was good. But then we were stuck there for 2 days, I guess, and then it was the 3rd. It was 3rd of January before we let on the land out there. We was about 3 days late.
Wasn't it awfully cold?
Oh, yeah, I know the snow was pretty deep. I think we'd travel in 6-inch snow, maybe. Walk most of the time. All us kids just get behind a wagon and walk.
They just had 7 kids, Sam.
What kind of house did you live in when you got up
When we first moved in down there, we had a 20-foot tent, what the old pyramidal wall tent, you know. And we cooked and ate, slept in it. And it took about, well, it was on account of the weather. The weather got so bad you couldn't do anything. And then later we started in, the first dugout was just a half dugout, and it was 20-foot square. It was pretty big. But he put a pitch roof on it and shingled it. I don't know why, but he was the laughing stock of the neighborhood because he put shingle roof on that thing. And then later we built another one off at the angle, you know, for a kitchen and whatnot. And then a few years later, he built a little frame house in between, and we had a lot of room. It was kind of a
Two-story.
scrambled up thing, but we had a lot of room.
How long did you live in that tent?
Oh, I expect 2 months at least, because it was bad weather and you just couldn't do nothing.
Was it cold inside the tent?
No, they had one of them topsy stoves, you know, with a oven in the stovepipe, and it put out a lot of heat. I don't remember. I think there was some old dead trees around there, and we had plenty of wood. And
Cow chips.
no, the cow chips was all too wet to burn. It was too good and wet.
Our older sister used to like to tell about one time when we picked up a lot of cow chips when they were dry, you know, and had a pile of them for our winter fuel, and I guess it was just a kind of combustion, you know, and they burned. Just really was a tragedy because that's all we had for fuel, you know.
Glad you go out and pick some more.
As kids, what kind of chores did you do on the farm?
Well, just about everything, didn't we?
There was, I was the oldest boy, and then we had one other boy that he wasn't quite as handy, and I'd always have to go get the horse and get him up and feed him, but there was 2 or 3 girls, and they milked the cows. I can't remember ever milking a cow but once, and they had one that was pretty easy to milk, and I'd milk her once in a while. But the women milked all the cows, and I'd go out and get the horses up, or drive the cows up too, you know.
Do any plowing?
Yeah, I used to run a plow after I got to be 11, 12 years old.
Did you plow with horses or mules?
Well, we had both. Seemed to me like we had.
Dad sold those 2 big mules, you know, during the First World War.
Yeah, it seemed to me like that I worked 4 head, 2 mules in the middle and a horse on each side for a long time, and I don't know why he hitched them up like that, but they worked all right.
Did you have a turning plow, a walking plow, or?
Well, all of the early plowing, it had to be, we broke sod, you know, with an old walking plow. And you plow a furrow about that wide, and it would turn that over pretty flat, say. And then you'd make 2 furrows. Then the 3rd furrow, I would follow with a gallon bucket that we fixed it on a roller and roll it right in there, and punch holes in the end, and the seeds would come out. That's how we planted it. And we grew a crop that way, feed crop the first year.
What was it, Capricorn or?
Well, it seemed like it was a Duke's mixture of Kaffir and cane, but we grew quite a lot of feed, enough to feed our horses. That was the main thing. We could get by with everything else. You know.
What kind of chores you do in the farm?
I milked cows, fed the chickens, helped my mother in the garden. After I got a little bigger, I worked in the field too. I shocked a lot of wheat.
Tell me about wheat harvest.
Well, you know, I was thinking after you and I talked about some of this, you know, that during threshing time, they always had a revival meeting over at the church. And we would be so tired because we wouldn't even get through washing dishes from having our supper evening meal, you know, until late. And then we'd have to go to church. And we'd just be so tired. But of course, that was when they had thrashing crews come in and thrash the wheat.
It don't seem to me like we raised broom corn. You know, broom corn got to be quite a market here at one time. We raised quite a lot of broom corn, and it didn't take any machinery particularly, because you'd pull the darn stuff and stack it, you know, and then they'd come in with a seeder and baler and bale the darn stuff. But the wheat, what little wheat was bound, but then they come along with the headers, you know, and then the header would throw it up into a barge, and then you'd stack it. And then in the fall, while the threshing machines would start, you know, and they'd tour the country and thresh the darn stuff for you.
How many acres of wheat did you have?
Oh, I don't think we ever did run over. Maybe probably 100 acres would be as much as we ever had at one time down there.
How many men in a harvest crew?
Well, when we was running the header, well, it'd take about, gosh darn it, it'd take about 4, 6, 8, take 8 or 10.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, probably.
Then,
10.
And how many different pieces of equipment were used in the harvest?
well, just your two barges that hold us, built up high on one side so that the
You'd pitch the
feeder wouldn't throw it over the
Right
back, you
in.
know, on the machine. And then one man running this header, and it took 4 head of horses to run it. And then you had to have a driver of this barge, and then one guy arranging it in there, you know, to where you could get it full. And then you and the driver then pitched it off onto to a man who was stacking it. It was hard work.
How big were the stacks?
Oh, they'd be 30, 40 feet long, and they'd be built up to be about 10, 12 foot high, and then they'd shrink as it dried, you know, they'd get out.
Is there a certain way that you stack the wheat, like with the heads pointed in or pointed out?
No,
Or?
it didn't make no difference, because it all settled down and would turn water just from about any position. And I was in the Army in the First World War, and when I got out of the Army, why, it was long in June after harvest. I started to work for a threshing machine, and paid $5 a day. That was big money. And I worked 105 days. I went all through wheat, maize, kaffir, clear up to cold weather. And that's I guess that's the most money I ever had in my life. So,
Would all the farmers get together and help harvest each other's wheat?
yeah, they'd all swap, and particularly on this broom corn stuff, you know, they'd all gang up and pull some old boy's crop, you know, and then move over and pull theirs.
How do you pull broom corn?
Just get this head like that, just snap it out of the boot. You hold the boot on
Now,
this
that
side.
was one thing I couldn't do. I was too little.
Oh, I
and
could
mine
snap
was-
that stuff just fast as I could walk.
I had 2 sisters that pulled broom corn.
Where was there a factory here that made brooms in this area?
What?
A factory that made brooms?
No, you'd have a lot of little local fellas, you know, who would make them, but no, not a big deal. It was all shipped
And
out.
there-
And
What
you know,
was they called, the guy that came around and bought the broom corn? There's always a guy came around, you
Oh,
know,
yeah,
and bought
yeah.
the broom corn. You didn't take it to town and sell it like you did your wheat or something like that, you know.
they'd buy it, and then you'd have to deliver it wherever they wanted it.
Remember Statehood Day? Do you remember Statehood Day, 1907, when we joined the Union?
I don't know, and I don't know why I don't. I can remember being down to Oklahoma City to Uncle Ross's one time and telling all the things they did, you know. But I don't remember
You
much
would
about
have
it.
been,
I don't
what,
know why.
about,
We was so darn remote, we
Well,
probably didn't know anything about it
You'd
for a week.
have been 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah, but I sure don't.
But I was born the year before
Yeah.
Statehood.
When was the first time you went to Oklahoma City?
Well, I can't think. I can't think the first time I was down there, but I had an uncle down there who was a druggist. And I went down there and stayed 3 or 4 days. And they had the old side door streetcars and all that stuff. And one was Statehood. What date?
November 16th.
Yeah, November 16th,
Well,
1907.
that was just soon after Statehood, I think, was the first time I was down there.
How big was Oklahoma City?
Oh, I think at that time they claimed it was about 75,000, 80,000 people. But I don't know whether it was or not. I don't think it ever was quite as big as they claimed. It's getting pretty big now.
Ever go to Guthrie in the early days?
No, you know, as a matter of fact, I joined, I went over there and took consistory in 22 or 3. And that, I think that's the first time I was ever there.
Yeah.
I never was there in the early days.
When did you all start school?
Well, I started in 1912. Did you start when we first came out here?
No, there was a year or two we didn't have any school.
See, our dad helped organize a school district down in the extreme eastern part of the
I can remember
Panhandle.
going to school down in Arkansas. I don't think they made any difference. I think I was going to school when I was 4 years old.
You might have been.
And but then we went a year or two out here that we didn't go to school, and then they organized a district. And
Was it a subscription school?
I don't know whether it was. Was it a subscription school? Did
No,
you have to pay so
no,
much, or
I
was
don't
it a
think so.
county school?
No, I don't think so. And let's see, is there nothing there now, is there, where we used to go to school?
No, I moved it off. Didn't have any church at that time either, and our dad was one that got the church started, and they had that in, there used to be now that was a sod house that Aunt Kate Costin lived in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's where they had the first church services before they could get a little church
Yeah.
started.
How far did you all go through school? How many years?
8 until I went to high school then at Laverne.
How far did you go through school?
Did you just graduate from 8th grade?
Yeah, just 8th grade. That's all. I came up here to Beaver for 8th grade graduation in when? 1909?
Probably.
I don't know. I don't know what it was.
How did Slap Out get its name?
Well, there was a fellow that had a store on one side of the street, and he called it Nye, and this Mr. Johnson lived just a little ways east of where Slap Out is now, and he started the store up there, and every time anybody come in and ask him for something, why, he'd say he was Slap Out. Now that's the story. I don't know. I guess that really
being
is.
on the next wagon.
Yeah, yeah. But this Mr. Johnson, he was quite a guy.
When did you decide to join the military, join the Army?
Well, I just was subject to the draft, and I messed around and they didn't draft me. And I tried to enlist. I went out in Colorado and tried to enlist, and they said, we can't take you without your draft board says you can go, you know. And then I come back home and I enlisted to the draft board. I said, next time you get a vacancy, I want to go. And that's how I got in.
What year was this? When?
No, it'd have been, I guess early 17.
Yeah, imagine so.
Where'd you go for basic training?
To Fort Riley, Kansas.
Fort Riley, Kansas?
Yeah, I was in the medical corps right from the start.
Tell me about Fort Riley. What was it like?
Well, it was, you know, they had the old gun sheds down there, you know. It used to be a big cavalry outfit, you know, and always medical. And they used these gun sheds for all these recruits. Yes, darn, they'd issue us a canvas cotton, 2 blankets. And it was pretty early in the spring, and that, all the doors were open. They never did shut the doors. We just freeze to death at night. Canvas, cotton, 2 blankets.
What was your average day like in basic? And like what time was reveille? What would you get up and what would you do?
Well, it seemed to me like they had a pretty good routine. When you'd get up, why, of course, you did your morning exercise before you went to eat, and then usually you had a lot of stuff in the morning, and then in the afternoon is when you'd go do your drill, and then if sometime at 5 o'clock, why, they'd go retreat, and that'd be all. You could just go do about as you please around, just as long as you stayed in.
And how long did basic last?
Oh, not very long with me. It don't seem to me like it was any length of time until I was assigned to a company, and let's see. They built Funston up there then, you know. Funston's only 2 or 3 miles, you know, from Fort Riley. It got to be, at one time it had over 90,000 men in it.
Where were you when the flu was bad?
Well, we was in Funston, but they sent us back to Fort Riley, and we run barracks, turned barracks into hospital. My company run 4 hospital wards and barracks. Stayed there 12 days, 13 days, and they lost people. You know, they just died like flies from that stuff. You don't know anything about it.
So quite a few soldiers died from that flu epidemic?
We, at one time, we estimated we were losing about 350 a day. Oh, they just lost it.
Was that just at Fort Riley, or?
Yeah,
Wow.
in that, that'd be from Funston and Fort Riley both.
It was bad that year.
The only good thing about our part of it, if they developed pneumonia, why, we transferred them. We never had anybody die. We was just handling the first run cases, you know, and then if they went bad, why, we shipped them out to somebody else. They didn't have any medicine. They was digitalis. They had whiskey by the barrel and aspirin. Aspirin was pretty new.
How long were you at Fort Riley?
Let's see, I would have stayed there 4 or 5 months, I guess, before we finally shipped out. And I never did get overseas.
You didn't?
No, I was shifted around on the East Coast until the Armistice was signed, but never did.
Just ready to go across.
Oh yeah, we had our stuff even loaded on the ship out at in the Chesapeake Bay.
But there at Newport News? What'd you do in Armistice Day?
Well, I think I was driving trucks. I think we was on the road. Everybody was having a good time. They'd go through a little town, you know, and they'd stop, and we'd stop, and they'd try to feed us, you know, and give us a drink or something else.
Was there a big celebration when you got back to
Oh, yeah.
Newport News?
Yeah. Oh,
What were all the soldiers doing back there when you got there?
Oh, nothing. They were just as loose as they could be, you know, the minute the thing was over. As a matter of fact, I don't think they knew where half of them were. I never did think they did.
So what'd you do when you came back?
Well, I was, I worked on a discharge bureau. I'd come home when we got this way back. I got into Kansas City. I said, I want to pass, I'll just go on home and see the folks. See. When I got back, well, they'd already started discharging men, see, and I was kind of stuck. So I worked on a discharge bureau for 6 weeks, I think.
Did you do any work for the war effort in World War I?
Just a little knitting. Our mother did a lot of knitting, and I did a little bit. I wasn't too big then. We rolled bandages.
Mm-hmm. What did you all do in the 20s?
I got married in 1925.
Well, let's see.
That was the year I graduated from high school and got married the same year.
Mm-hmm. I bought this funeral home. There was an old boy. I come through here. I was working at Lawton, and I come through Laverne and picked up Jack Calloway, and we were going to Denver to a funeral director, National Funeral Directors Convention. And we stopped here, and old Richardson, he said, "Let me sell you this place." And, well, it's no good. Well, he did a lot of business. We messed around and bought it in 1922, and then we went on out and took in this convention. And I never did go back to Lawton. I just called them up, and they sent me my stuff, and I've been stuck here ever since. About.
Here at Beaver?
We have a younger brother then that run the funeral home.
Yeah, he had a brother come up here in 27, 28.
When did you get into the funeral business? When did you get into the mortuary business?
What year was that you bought the?
Well, it was in 22 when I bought this, but I had gone to school in 20, right soon after I got out of the Army. And then the first job I had was at a funeral home in Lawton. That's where I got all acquainted with all that bunch down there.
Mm-hmm. How have the funeral practices changed over the years?
Oh, I don't know. There's not any difference in it outside of what it costs you. It's pitiful now, you know.
Yeah. Of course, they have all the fancy coffins now.
Oh yeah. Well, we'd had a lot of pretty fancy ones then, but they didn't cost so much. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know who makes the money. I sold out to my brother, and he run this place then another 20 years, but he sold out before prices got so high. He wasn't in during a high. You can't talk to anybody under $2,000, you know what I mean?
When did it become a state law that bodies had to be embalmed?
I don't think it is.
It's not?
No, you can't ship one unless it's embalmed, but you can go bury one without embalming it now if you want to. Mm-hmm. And we did quite a few of them. We wouldn't even have a mortuary here in town. We'd go out and take care of bodies in the home.
So that was pretty general practice, wasn't it?
Well, it was hard work.
And what does it entail to lay out a body? What do you have to do? To go out to the home and prepare the body, what do you do?
Yeah, well, we'd carry a folding couch with us, and then all our instruments and everything in a case. But most places now, the neighbors would have this body bathed, and already if you was going to embalm it, well, it wasn't no big job, you know, just jump in and embalm it. And then you could tell them that they could go ahead and dress them, you know, if they wanted to. There was always a bunch of people doing that. And you put as much of it off on them as you could. And we got by in pretty good shape.
Now you say you had to bring your instruments. What kind of instruments would you need to?
In those days we worked under the arm, axillary. You go in and pick up an artery, you know, and then you inject fluid, see, and as you inject the fluid, well, the blood comes out. It takes.
I wondered if he knew how the embalming business went.
Yeah,
Well, as the fluid goes in, where does the blood come out?
well, you open a vein and you have a tube in the vein, and that's where the blood's coming out, and you're going in the artery with your fluid. See? And it don't take a lot. A weak solution, I expect a gallon switch within bottle of water in pretty good shape.
What kind of fluid do you use?
I don't know. I suppose most all of it is about 40% formaldehyde. And
Still use the same type of fluid that you used back then? Same thing?
Yeah. They add a lot to it now, you know, and smell it up good. But it's all about the same thing.
Mm.
Yeah, very little different.
Is there any reason, is there a certain depth the grave has to be?
No. They used to say 6 feet under the ground, you know. And anymore you use vaults. We'd always tell them about 5.5 feet, you know. But I remember one time I got a call they were going to ship in a body on Saturday. So I thought, well, okay, and said, get the grave dug, and I couldn't find a soul. So Sunday morning, I went out this cemetery, and I just got out and started digging. I got that thing down to about 5 foot, I guess, in about 3 hours, and I quit. And I can remember when I got the lid on that box, it was a box, not a vault. And I think they put some extra boards on it. I could step right out. It wasn't too deep. I got it about 5 foot. That's a job. That's hard work. Now then they go out with a backhoe, you know, and dig one in 15, 20 minutes.
What made you decide to go into the funeral business?
I used to run around with the funeral director down at Laverne when I was just a kid, and went out and helped him a little time or two. And when I come back after the service, he just jumped me up and he said, "You go to school." Just said, "You got enough money?" I don't know. I'd got out with a little money, you know. Just said, "Get busy and go to school," and I did.
He had a cleaning and pressing shop at
Oh
Woodward.
yeah, I did everything. You know, everything that wasn't the books.
What about the Depression? How'd that affect you all?
I don't know how it affected Ross, but I know my husband and I hadn't been married very long, and we sold a lot of wheat for 28 cents a bushel. And well, I tell you, we just really had it pretty tough.
What was your husband's name?
Hobart Moore.
Hobart Moore.
You had some money in the bank that went
Yeah,
broke too.
my husband had some money in the bank at Laverne that went broke. It was pretty bad. We moved into Laverne in 1929, and he started working for the bank down there. But times was so hard that didn't last too long, and then he got a chance to work for the Bank of Beaver City up here, so that's when we moved to Beaver.
How about the dust storms? How bad
It was
was it?
pretty bad. I tell you, couldn't hang clothes out on the line.
We
Dust was so
we
bad.
had the funeral home down on the street. It's the Masonic Lodge now. Well, it was then, but we had the ground floor, and that was after my first wife died, and I had a boy that was 7, 8 years old, and my sister was keeping him. But I was in there and working, and all of a sudden this thing blacked out. You know, you could see the glass window, and it just looked like it was a boiling right on the darn glass, and I couldn't see. And I jumped on the phone and got hold of the door to see if she had a kid yet. See, and yep, she had him in. And I imagine it was 2 hours before I ever tried to open the door and go out, and it finally subsided. But I never got a look at it because I was working, and I never got out, and it just hit me without knowing. And
Yeah, but there were weeks where we had really dust storms every day.
yeah, moved it around.
Yeah.
And we had a kind of an epidemic of what they call dust pneumonia. We lost a good many people from dust pneumonia. I buried several of them.
Was that the one that was real black? Was that what they call Black Sunday?
Yeah.
What were you doing that day?
My husband and I had gone to Shattuck. He had a brother that lived down there, and when we saw this storm coming up, their next door neighbors had a basement, and of course we didn't have any idea what was behind this, so they wanted us to come over there. And down in this basement, you couldn't see they had just a ceiling light. You couldn't any more see that than anything. It was so black.
How long did that storm last? You say about 2 hours?
I think it must have
Yeah.
been.
I
thought it never would end, I know.
It cleared up until I went down the street, that cafe down on the corner, you know.
Yeah.
I got down there and looked that over. You could tell the inside from the outside of that place. It was so dirty.
What did that storm look like when it was approaching?
Well, looked like it might be the end of the world,
Yes.
didn't it?
Well, it just rolled up kind of like a big wave would roll up, you know, on
it
the
was just
ocean.
black as
Just
could
rolled
be.
her up.
It was really black.
Did many people in this area go to California?
I don't know really whether there was or not. I don't think there was down around where we live. But
No, but up in here, I think you could probably, maybe a dozen, not of a big
of
lot.
course, it got worse farther west. But
There was
people lived.
some young people would go, you know, and of course they had a little better chance of getting work, but
I think the grapes of wrath was just a little overrated.
Yeah, John Steinbeck.
Yeah.
What kind of work did your husband do?
He worked in a bank.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
How long did you work as a
We
funeral?
farmed up until
Oh, you did?
then.
Okay. How long were you as a funeral director?
oh, about 35 years.
35 years. What about World War II? What'd you all do?
Well, my husband was too old to be drafted then.
I was on the draft board here. So, yeah, well, that was just about as bad as being in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of conscience objectors and everything else.
Were either one of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
Both of
Yes,
them.
both of them. One of them fought for the North and one for the South.
Mother's father was north and dad's father was south.
What were their names?
Jennings, Dr. E.M. Jennings was mother's father. And dad's father was G.D. Goodner.
I have some letters that our grandfather Jennings wrote to our grandmother during the Civil War. He was a doctor, and you know they're still very legible. The paper is about to come apart, but the writing is
Would you
still.
let us make copies of them?
Well, I never have. Dr. Calhoun borrowed them from me at one time. He was going, did you know there is a magazine called the Civil War Times?
Yeah, right.
Well, he's interested in that some way, and he was going to write up an article about it, and I guess he did, but I never did see it if it was ever published.
I would like to get some Xerox copies for the museum if it does.
Well, I'd be glad to let you have them to do that.
'Cause we have a section on the Civil War.
Oh, uh-huh.
I
I tried to give them to Missouri one time. We never did find the place they told me to go to ask about it. We were over to Jefferson City, and I asked at a place, you know, if they would be interested in having them, and they told me where to go, and we never did find the place.
Well, if you ever try again, let us know, because we have a section on the Civil War in the state archives.
Yeah. Well, I'd be glad to either donate them or to let you have them, you know, for copies.
Okay. Yeah.
And really, I should have copies made too.
And yeah, well, we'll be glad to.
We have, along with these letters, I have a picture of our grandfather Jennings. It was taken, I think, when he was 92 years old. Didn't he die when he was 93?
Yeah, something like that.
And a copy of an article that was in the Mena, Arkansas Times about him being a politician and so on and so forth, and how much he would be missed, but he hadn't lived in Arkansas for a good many years.
Did they come to Oklahoma?
Well, just for a while. Then he lived with his son in Beeville, Texas, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
that's where he's buried.
Ever hear any stories about the Civil War? About them?
I can't remember if
Oh.
probably did, but then I can't remember.
They were acquainted with they lived close together, and they used to get together and they do a lot of talking, but you couldn't get much out of it, you know. They were good friends and used to visit back and forth together. I never did get much out of it.
This, one of these letters, I think we told you that our grandfather was a doctor. He tells about a guy getting shot and them opening him up and filling him full of salt so they could send him back home. That's the only way they had of preserving them then, you know.
It was.
Yes. Real interesting things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you'd like to donate them, you know, we could put them in our Civil War collection and put them in under your name or your grandfather's name, whatever.
Well, I'll talk to the rest of the family
Okay.
and see what they think about
And
it.
they'll be there for the family to see,
Yeah,
and they can make you copies or whatever.
okay.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No. I get all talked out.
Okay. Thank you. This is September 13th, 1984. Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Logan R. Gregg. Mr. Gregg, where were you born?
In Chautauqua County, Kansas. Chautauqua.
When's your birthday?
December 11th. 1997.
1897.
1897, right.
What part of Chautauqua County were you born in?
There's a little town of Peru, I think, the way I've got the story. Well, I've been back there a time or two, and there's a little town of Peru, and we was on a farm. All were farmers. And it was on a farm there when I was born. I know that they had to go about 3 miles to get to the doctor and that kind of stuff.
My father was born in Peru.
Is that right?
Yep. He was born in 1921.
1921.
Did you know any Todds up there? Yeah, my grandparents lived up there for a while.
At Peru.
Yeah, you know that old brick factory that's up there?
Well, yeah.
My grandfather worked there. He worked in that brick factory.
That's in, you talk about in Chautauqua County?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my
And
grandfather...
there was an Elgin there, wasn't there?
Yeah, right. What was your father's name?
Riley. No, William Riley Gregg.
William Riley. And what was your mother's name?
Elisa Alice McKay Gregg. She was a McKay.
Yeah. Where were your parents from?
My mother's from Indiana, Terre Haute, and my father was in Missouri. He was born there in Missouri.
How come your folks moved to Kansas?
Well, it was along about the time, you see, that was was when they more or less going west, you know, looking for greener pasture, better times. Times were pretty hard those days. And that's the reason that so many people come out here. Just like we had to get out because there was a big family of us, and there was eight kids, 6 boys and 2 girls. And Dad had to get out to where he thought he could make some money.
When did they come to Kansas?
When did they come to Kansas? Let me see, I think I made a note of that. If I can find it. Just a second. Let's see. That would have been in 96.
96. Okay. What kind of work did he do?
Do I do?
Your father.
Farming.
He was a farmer. As a small boy, what kind of chores did you do in the farm?
Oh gosh, we had our milking to do, cows to milk and hogs to feed, and that's the way we had our living, was with hogs for our own meat, and cows for our butter and milk, and that's the way we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get out and work at something, you know, the boys was, the older boys. I was the youngest boy in the family.
How big was the town of Peru?
Gosh, it didn't, I don't, see, we left there. I was born in 97, see, so I would know from my experience at that time. It seemed like when I went back there, it was just kind of just a little thing, maybe a store or two, something like that.
When did you all leave Peru?
Well, we come, we left, I left Case County, Missouri. My folks did, that's before I was born. I was in 1896 and come over to Chautauqua County, Kansas in about 1896. 1896,
Yeah.
rather. And from there, let's see, yeah. And then from there we moved from down to Peru, from Chautauqua County, over to Grant County, Oklahoma. That was another move we made. Grant County, Oklahoma is at a little town of Clyde between Medford and Waukeeta.
How come you moved to Oklahoma?
Trying to get back to where we get a wholesome land.
Mm-hmm. And what year was that when you moved?
Well, from there, that was in 1896. That's when we moved from there to Beaver County. Because I was born in 7, I was born there, you see.
In 97.
In 97. No, in 98, that's when we come out.
Okay, you left in 98.
98 or 99, right in there. Because we come over there to this town of Clyde and put in 2 crops there. And moved out, and Dad come out here and filed in 1903. 2. Filed in 2, and we moved out here from there in 3.
Okay. Remember the trip out here?
Oh yeah.
Tell me about the trip.
Okay, sir. We had a covered wagon, and we had 4 horses, and 5 or 6 cows. I don't remember just what. And all of the belongings we had was in this covered wagon. And had a barrel on each side of it where we could carry some extra water to going across the country there, and we'd always park, make it to some creek or some river, try to stay all night. Sometimes we'd have to use all this water up, probably watering some cows and horses. And make probably 20 miles sometimes a day, sometimes more. And so, and when we came from Grant County, Oklahoma rather, over to, from Medford there, over here where we stopped at, I remember real well stopping at Englewood, one of our closest to home, you know, had a long, pretty long drive across from Medford there to Englewood. And from Englewood, we drove down to Beaver Ranch down here on this river. Stayed all right there. And the next night, we come in and we had my mother had a brother living here, 10 miles west of Beaver. We stayed all night at Englewood and at the BB Ranch and got on in here the next day.
How big was the BB Ranch?
But it seemed like to me it was a pretty good outfit. It was finally consumed by Barbies. I think they...
Barbie, what's that?
Barbie Ranch is a big ranch
Yeah.
down here,
Okay.
a big outfit down here.
Do you know the people that ran the BB Ranch?
No, I don't recall it.
Okay, what about the Barbie Ranch? You know them?
Oh,
When did they establish their ranch?
well, it was... Let's see, my daughter, that ranch was... It was a pretty good sized outfit when we came through there. So I don't know how long, but this Barbie Ranch was a big outfit, and is yet, you know, it was owned by the kids, and cut up, but it's, I imagine 15 sections, maybe better,
Mainly cattle?
many cattle.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to come from Grant County to the Panhandle?
In Grant County, well, let's see. It took us 2 days to get over to Englewood. I don't know where we stopped between Englewood and Grant County. Englewood, Kansas. And we stayed all night there. There's a little old creek come down there, and we got water for cattle and horses there. You know where Englewood is, I reckon.
Where'd you sleep when you camped out?
We just have a little tent we put up. Some of us sleep in the overjet. There was Dad and Mother and my 2 sisters and myself.
What's the overjet?
Overjet?
Yeah,
Oh,
what
the
is that?
covered wagon, that's the part that's covered, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the sheet that goes over there.
Right. That's the overjet?
That's the overjet, yeah.
Okay. And how'd your mother fix the meals on the road?
Over the campfires.
Campfires. What kind of food did she fix?
Well, have biscuits and bacon. And we had our chicken with it. We had I think about 3 dozen chickens in crates alongside this wagon. It was pretty crude outfit.
How many head of cattle did you have with you?
I think it was 5 or maybe
5.
6.
What was your...
We had to milk them too on the road. We milk cows.
What was your chores on the road? What'd you have to do?
I was pretty small, and you know, I don't remember just how I got by doing it, but I remember I'd have to help milk, and I'd have to pick up kindling and do this and that.
You helped drive the cattle?
Oh yes. That's it.
When you got here, how did your father locate the homestead?
He'd come out here the year before we left. We'd stayed 2 years over Grant County. He got on a train there and came to Englewood and got the mail hack that run over here to Beaver here and filed on this land that this uncle that was here had picked it out. It was 8 miles west of town and a mile south.
When you first moved to the homestead, what kind of house did you live in?
Well, we just lived in this overjet. We stayed down there at this uncle's where they had some water. We stayed in this overjet, and they split their houses up for us and kind of made it a little more comfortable.
What kind of house was it?
They had a sod house. A sod house, 3, 4. I think it was 4 rooms.
How do you build a sod house?
Well, sir, we had what's called sod cutters. It was a blade, 12 inches long, a cut blade on the side, and it come up here, 2 inches up, or 3 inches, I think, 3 inches up, and then with runners on it, 2 by 6 runners, and you just take that and run it down under the ground and take a team on it, pull that there and cut it, and you go back and cut it in certain lengths. See, 16 or 18 inches or 20 inches, whatever you might want to try to handle. Cut them with a straight spade and pick it up out of that ditch and put it on the wagon, haul it in, and build the house.
How big was that sod house?
That's where we lived?
Yep.
Well, it was 4 rooms. I don't remember just how big.
Did you have the inside walls covered?
They'd be plastered with sand and gyp. We'd get out in this country, we'd get this gyp and mix it with sand and plaster. It wasn't a hard plaster like cement, but it was make a smooth surface.
What about the ceiling? What was it?
The ceiling would be just whatever you might have. We'd have to put the roof on there. The roof would be just like the roofs now. We'd put tar paper on them, and some of them we'd get up there and put sod on that to hold that tar paper down too, see? Put this sod that likes in the wall.
How long did you live in that sod house?
Now, this sod house I'm talking about was already built, but when we at the same time where we were living in this sod house, we went up on the farm, just a 3/4 mile, the farm Dad filed on, and Dad hauled lumber from Liberal, and we built a 12 by 24 house out of lumber, and dug a cellar besides that, storm cellar. Taken about 2 years for us to get settled in there, and of course we had the older boys now had jobs and would always send a little money in to help keep us going.
So how many people lived in that house, the frame house?
Shoot, sometimes the whole family, there's 8 kids, and we'd have to, of course they had the cellar down there, we'd had a bed down in this old cellar, you know, and no, you know, we didn't have no running water. Had a toilet back about 100 yards from the house. And that was this here's Roebuck catalog hanging there. Now, I'm just telling you facts of life. That's the way
So you had 8 kids plus your parents in this one room house?
Yes. Well, it was a 2-room house,
Oh, 2
had a
rooms.
division in it,
Okay.
and this cellar.
And what kind of crops were you raising on the homestead?
We'd raise corn, maize, and I was just telling somebody today about talking about burning cow chips. That's what we used for fuel then, burning cow chips. And this maize was a real good cow feed, good producing feed, but it had a crook neck on it. And we raised so much of that, we'd burn that even in the wintertime.
When did you start the school?
I started school in, I believe it was 4. Let's see. Yeah, 1904, I went to some school that year.
What was the
Next
name?
year. Kokomo Schoolhouse. Kokomo Schoolhouse. And I went there, and this Kokomo district was a pretty big sized district. And this one-room schoolhouse got overcrowded, so we split the district in 2. And it was East Kokomo and West Kokomo. And I was in West Kokomo, and that's where I went to school, finished my 8th grade there.
How far did you go through school? How many grades?
I went to high school, and I didn't get all my high school work.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Statehood Day,
November 16th, 1907.
yeah,
That's the day Oklahoma joined the Union.
yeah, that's right.
Tell me about that day.
Well, we scarcely noticed it out here, because we was out with no telephone, no televisions, no way to communicate, and we just know that we went from that stage to statehood then. And that's all. There was nothing exciting to us about it, because
Just
we
another,
couldn't see no change here.
just another work day?
Just another work day. That's right. Every day was a work day. Sundays you take off to go to church, sure. But it still was a work day. Your cows had to be milked, your hogs had to be fed, your horses had to be taken care of, and chickens, and eggs gathered, and so on and so forth. Sunday was just another work day, but we would never go to the field and hook up the horse and do that, but the chores was enough to keep you busy.
What did you do for recreation?
Oh, there was little old kid football, baseball games. We got to, and we'd have I know during my grade school, well, we'd have another school had a bunch of kids, you know, they'd go play baseball, see who, and go to Sunday school. And of course they'd have, I don't know, different kinds of, and of course the country dances, we'd have some country dances.
Tell me about your early Christmases. What do you remember about them?
The first one that I can remember, but it was, I think about the first year of school. I went to school. There were some neighbors that had come here in 86 or something like that, had an old sod house down there, and they were good neighbors. And this lady, this Mrs. Lyle, she bought me a cap, a new cap for Christmas. Shoot, I thought I was holding in tall cotton. So that had that cap, you know, and had ear flaps on it. I had something wonderful. I didn't have to tie a rag around my ears, going to school, and one thing or another.
What kind of toys you get for Christmas, or did you?
No, heck no toys.
You make your own toys?
If there's any toys that had to be made, you know.
What kind of toys did you make or were made for you?
I don't recall of making any toys. It was always some clothes or something like that with a Christmas present. But it was a necessity more than toys that our Christmas was.
How long did you stay on the farm?
Oh gosh, I spent all my life in fact just when my son got old enough to take over the farm, I turned it over to him, and I helped him for several years, and I still go out to farm.
Is this the homestead?
Yeah, the old homestead still on ours. So of course we accumulated little.
What about World War One?
I was too young, and I got married early, and living on the farm. But I was on the next call when the Armistice was signed.
What'd you do that day when the Armistice was signed?
Well, I don't know. I think he got drunk.
Did the neighbors celebrate out here on
Yes.
Armistice Day?
Yes, that was quite a day.
I was talking to one guy and he mentioned shooting the anvils.
Oh yeah, heck, I done that on. Was that was more not on? That was 4th of July and such things that we did.
Tell me
that.
about shooting the anvils.
Well, I tell you what we done one time. We taken these 2 anvils and filled it full of this black powder. And they kind of hollowed out on it. You know how an anvil's made? You saw anvils, haven't you? Okay. They kind of hollowed out underneath, you know, where you set them down, bolt them down. And we filled that full of black powder and run a fuse in there. About a foot or 2 long. And then put this other animal on top of it and bolted it together or wired it together any way we get it hold together good and tight. And light that fuse and run like the dickens. And it would make an awful noise. It just like a cannon going off.
We'll blow the anvils apart.
Oh gosh, yeah. The old black powder. Well, heck, it blow them dang animals probably. Well, you know. You know about how heavy an anvil is.
A couple hundred pounds.
Yeah. It's going. Sometimes you hear about blowing through the roof. I think we blew the hole in that old blacksmith shop that was here in town. A bunch of us kids did one time.
You did that on 4th of July?
Yeah.
What about Halloween? What would you do?
Oh, that was a lot of different things to be done. They would always trick or treating and like they do more or less nowadays, but sometimes the tricks got a little rougher than they should, or maybe.
What would the kids do?
Oh, they'd all get together and have a party.
You said the tricks would get rougher than they should.
Sometimes, and what I mean, you go to the neighbors and probably take his cow out some other pasture or something, or do something to take their buggy, wagon, and turn them upside down, such things as that. Just anything that.
Tell me about there were 2 depressions, the Depression of 1907 and the Depression of the 1930s.
Now, the Depression in 1907, we scarcely noticed that here. Really didn't notice it. But the one in 30 was bad. We felt it. Worse than, and most of the country did, because we didn't, it was a bad summer, bad fall, bad winter. We didn't raise anything, and we had to get rid of our cattle any way we could. And it was worse here on us than anywhere, because the dust, we're right in the center of the Dust Bowl. And the depression in there with it, it just doubled up on us. It was very hard time for us.
Tell me about the dust storms. How bad were they?
That came up today. I was telling about, someone was talking about that, I was telling about, we was out here, about a mile from town, at a, fellow was, had a home out there, a young fellow about my age, and he had a wife, and and she was gone or something, we went out there and playing poker. At that time, poker playing around here was, they got you, they threw you in jail. And so we sneak off someplace like that, and we was out there playing poker, and someone got up and went out and said, "Come here." And we went out there, and we got up and went out. And there's that thing coming down across this river, other side of this river. Just looked like it was rolling, you know. And you just think, well, the end of time or something. By golly, when it come over, well, you didn't know whether it was going to be Jesus on the white cloud or the devil on that cloud. It just scared the heck out of you, you know. It was just black, everything blacked out. And as I say, we all made a run for an old cellar and got down in this old cellar. This would be an illustration of how black it was. And I was about the last one in the cellar, and I shut this door down. This old cellar didn't have no air holes or anything in it. Just that door. I pulled that door down, and we stayed in there, maybe 30, 40 minutes long. We stand that dust just go through, just seemed like get in any worse. And finally someone said, "Who's at the door?" And I said, "Well, I'm up here." Or something. And they said, "Well, why don't you open the door?" And so I did, and they said, "Logan, are you going to open that door?" And there's the dang door was open, but it's still just that black, you know, and that cellar was just, and you could light a match now in that cellar after I'd opened that door, and you couldn't see the light in there with that. You couldn't see that. It was so dark on the outside, and then in the black spot, you couldn't see no light out there. Now, that's just how bad it was.
How'd you breathe in dust storms like that?
Well, you just have to hold your handkerchief over your face, gosh, and do everything else. And I don't know how it come it didn't kill a lot of more people than it did. Of course, it did kill a lot of people, you know, that had a little emphysema.
Is that what they call dust pneumonia?
Yeah, dust pneumonia.
Okay, is dust pneumonia just when dust gets in the lungs or what?
Well, yeah, that's what would irritate the lungs, you see, and that's, pneumonia is a lung disease.
Did you do any work for WPA or CCC?
Yes, sir.
What'd you do?
I was, went to work scooping dirt on them at, I think it's $3.25 a shift. And that was a 3-day shift, scooping dirt and hauling it out and putting it on the roads and one thing and another. I worked at that 3 days and come in town, and that's when the WP that was in the Bill Murray times, see. Bill Murray's part of it, the governor's part of it. You remember what I'm talking about? Do you follow me what I'm talking about? Then the WPA started then, and the fella come in here from somewhere head of this, and they had an apartment up across from the employment office. And I got a job on just a few days after on that job out there. The fellow called me in and wanted me to work in the employment office with him. And so I came in there and went to work with him. And I'd go by this place where this office was, the WPA office. And this lady, I think she kind of felt sorry for me or something. She told, I remember old man Ryan, I forget his name now, But this lady told Mr. Ryan she wanted me to go see it. She wanted him to go see him. He could hire me to come over there and help him in the office. So, so I was lucky enough to, he come over and interviewed me, and he put me on as timekeeper. And I stayed on that job as timekeeper till, I don't know, till about as long as it lasted. And I think it got less than $30, I think, a week.
What kind of job was it?
Well, you'd have to keep time. You'd go out to a job here and check your time cards and bring them in.
Okay, what kind of jobs were the men doing that you were timekeeper for?
Scooping dirt and doing odd jobs or whatever, maybe.
Was it mainly
Now,
road work?
now in this year, one of the jobs is right here in our town, is where the jail is now. They built that with WPA labor. There's a rock quarry out beyond where Dad filed.
Mm-hmm.
And this gyp rock, when you uncover it, it's kind of soft. You can saw it. And so that was built on WPA labor, that jail down there. Wish you go in there and look at the work in that thing. It's worth your while. It's a neat job. And a lot of bridge building was done with WPA labor.
Mm-hmm. What about World War II? You do any work for the war effort? Just still farming and... Mm-hmm. Did the war improve farming?
Did the war improve the farming?
Yeah, I mean, was there more of a market for the farm products during the war?
Oh, yes. Yes. Sure. And that's one. That was kind of the end of our depression, you see, the farming, and the dust storm was over. Well, we got to raising crops then, and we just come out of it without it too bad a blemish.
I heard someone say that they used some Japanese labor on the farms and ranches around here. Have you heard about that?
No. And I reckon I've never been out of this county 3 months at one time in my life.
Well, I was talking to some people over around Boise City.
Well, now I went and worked for the state highway department and went out there and built this road from Gate here, 64 highway, there's the Colorado line north of, and I never did.
Was that during the war?
Well, yes.
Okay. Because it was, some of the Japanese families that were on the West Coast, they put in those internment camps.
Yeah.
They said that they brought some of them out here and they worked on the farms and ranches out here.
Well, they might have, but I never, but not to my knowledge.
Okay. How has farming and ranching techniques changed in your lifetime?
Oh my goodness. When I was a kid, we'd plow or started breaking that farm out there, getting ready with sod plows now. That's probably, you don't know what a sod plow is, I don't reckon. But it had this blade 12 inches long and went under the ground. And it had rods that come up in a way that when that sod come up on it, it'd turn it over. Just turn it over in the next furrow, see? And just 12 inch time. And if you get 2 acres a day with that dang thing, you'd working from sun up to sundown. And I know when I was just a kid trying to break sod out there, I had to put your lines, horses, on this plow. You'd have the lines would come over and you put them over your shoulder and under one arm and over the other. That way you kind of guide them and hold the plow handles. And you'd have to work 12 hours better before you get 2 acres. And you said, now how much has it changed? Well, we got tractors out there now on the farm today that we can easily do 100 acres with. We've got a couple tractors out there we run over 250 acres, maybe a day. Now that's how. But and I had one of the first, one of the first tractors, and they wasn't much better than the horses, because my brother, just older than I am, he's driving the teams, and I was taking his tractor and working. And he didn't do dang much as much work with 6 horses I would with tractors. They're just that slow. But now, gosh, and the combines, you can cut 100 acres of wheat a day with them, you know. And then it's just all, it's a different world.
How many men in a harvest crew?
Now,
No, then. For wheat harvest.
okay, you had your header man, you had 2 barges, 2 men in each barge, and you had your stacker, and you had scratch man around stacking it up. Now, that's when, in the early days, that's when and there would be 2, 4, 6, 7 men all the time. The barge would go out to this header, and this header would cut the wheat off and had an elevator on it, elevated up in what we call a barge. And this barge had do you follow me now? Mm-hmm. It had a low side and a high side. And you put that elevator up in this low side, and one man walk on that wheat trumpet and keep that high side full, you know. And you go in and pitch it off on the stack. And after that wheat went to a sweat, they had to wait to what they call wheat going to a sweat. Then your thresh machine would come in, and you take a thresh machine and have to have about 4 men on each side on that old thresh machine, and throwing this wheat over in this feeder house, go through the separator, and the man of harness, the 2 or 3 men of harness. A lot of different. Now you do all of that with no one man can own.
At the combine. The combine replaced
Yes,
the header and the thresher and.
that's right.
Well, what else you want to talk about?
I don't know. I just told you about it. Our life here has been pleasant, and I'm like the old boy said, if I didn't live here, I'd move here. So I like it here. I know it. I wouldn't. I've got a grandson that's a doctor in St. Louis, pretty high up doctor, and I go up there and see him once in a while, and I wouldn't trade my place for his. In fact, I wouldn't live in St. Louis, it'd give me the same.
What's his name, St. Louis?
What is his name?
Yeah.
Dr. Fry.
Dr.
Robert
Fry?
Fry. He's at Jewish hospital. He's got there's a big, Crescent clinic out there that he belongs to. And he's got Jewish hospital, Barnes Hospital, and several that he operates in. He's a high-class sort of a guy. He makes speeches from coast to coast on different medical journals and writes some of them.
Tell me about floods in the rivers out here.
Well, we used to, we'd have them, but not anymore. We've got so many dams and things. We don't, this river here hasn't run half the time in the last 8 or 10 years. It used to be washing out bridges but they got the dams and everything. We just don't have anything like that here.
What were the floods like?
Oh gosh, I saw this old river come down here would be a mile wide, and it'd come down in a a crest. It just looked like it'd be as high as this wall. Just water just rolled like that. I saw it do that several times. And just take bridges and everything ahead of it. All the cross fences, you know, water gaps.
What about tornadoes?
We really haven't had a tornado.
Not like Woodward.
No. No, we sure haven't. We've been very fortunate we haven't had a tornado.
Well, Mr. Gregg,
I hope it hasn't been boring to you.
no, I've enjoyed this.
I enjoyed
Thank you.
helping you.
So this is September 13th, 1984. This is Joe Todd, an interview with
I am Miss.
Miss Helen Beck. Okay. Miss Beck, where were you born?
Well, I was born between Kremlin and Hillsdale, Oklahoma, on September the 12th, 1906.
Yesterday was your birthday. Well, happy birthday. A day late. Who is your father?
John A. Beck,
And your mother?
Alice M. Curtin Beck, Kirton.
How do you spell that? I'm sorry.
Kirton.
Okay. Where were your parents from?
Well, my mother was born in Iowa,
And your father?
in Kansas, Crawford County, Kansas.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was in livery business at Hillsdale, Oklahoma for a while.
No, livery stable.
Yes.
How come they came to Oklahoma?
How come they come to Oklahoma? Well, their parents came to the Cherokee Strip.
They did?
Yes.
So you're,
See, I was born before statehood.
yeah. And so your grandfather made the run of, so it was your grandparents that made the run of 93?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What was your grandfather's name?
Well, which one do you want?
Both of them.
Well, G.T.M. Beck.
And the other one?
William Curtin.
Did they ever talk about making the run?
Oh, they probably did, but I was quite young then.
You say your father was in the livery business at Hillsdale?
Hillsdale.
Where is Hillsdale?
It's in Garfield County, and it's north of Enid, or northwest.
Ever help your father in the livery stable?
What?
Ever help your father in the livery stable?
No.
No. What kind of chores did you do around the house as a little girl?
Ooh, just different things like helping with the dishwashing and carrying water and sweeping and just all kinds of housework.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to be older, I helped to do outside chores.
What kind of outside chores?
Milk cows, feed calves.
You have a farm?
Yes. Well,
Mhm.
you haven't asked me about the farm. have you?
Yeah. Tell me about the farm.
Oh, well, my father traded his livery business for a relinquishment in Beaver County, what is now Beaver County. In, well, he filed the first day of May, 1907.
And where was his claim?
Oh, well, it's in the west part of Beaver County. 32321.
And when did you move out here?
When?
Yeah, do you remember? Well, you were awfully young when they came, weren't you?
Well, I possibly was about a year old, I
Yeah.
think.
Mm-hmm. What are your first memories of Beaver County and the farm?
Just grew up with it. As far as I can think.
Having your brothers and sisters?
I have a sister.
Mhm.
She's younger.
Did you do any plowing in the fields?
No, I did hoeing, hoe
Hoeing.
weeds.
What kind of crops did you raise in the farm?
Well, Capricorn, that's a grain, and some, as we call it, Indian corn, wheat, oats, barley.
Mm-hmm.
We milked cows, and raised chickens and garden. All of us, well, 4 of us worked at it.
Mm-hmm. What kind of house did you live in?
What kind? Well, I got to live in the soddy.
Tell me about the soddy.
Well, I don't know very much about it because that's quite a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a sod house that this lady that filed the claim first, she and her husband built, and they had some other little buildings and chicken house. And this made of sod, but my sister didn't get to live in the sod.
How come?
Well, she was younger than I was. It wasn't preserved.
Mm-hmm. Did your father build a frame house then?
Yes.
How big was it?
Well, you'd probably smile. About 15 to 16 feet square.
Mm-hmm.
So,
How many rooms?
well, my mother said to anybody ask you how many rooms, you just tell them how many. Just give them all the names, all the rooms.
Mm-hmm. How did 4 people live in that house?
How did 4 people live in it?
Mm-hmm.
We just lived there
Mhm.
all the time.
What kind of furnishings did you have?
Oh, we just had necessities, cook stove, table and some chairs and some beds.
What did you burn in the cook stove for fuel?
Well, we burned some cow chips and some coal. One time I can remember this, I think it was about 1911 and 12, we had a severe snowstorm and we didn't have much fuel. We burned some Capricorn heads. And you know, that made the nicest popcorn.
It did. Is that the worst winter that you can remember?
Well, there were some other snowstorms.
When did you start to school?
When did I start school?
When and where?
Well, my father helped get the school district organized. He was one of them that worked with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 6 years old.
What was the name of the school?
Liberty, District 86.
How did they get a teacher here to teach the school?
Some of the neighbors would apply for the school and teach whatever length of time we had, a few months.
So they didn't have a full-time teacher then?
Oh, we'd have our term for each year.
But it was the neighbors that taught the school?
No, I say someone around the neighborhood
Oh,
usually
okay.
in that part of what we'd call, of course, the neighborhood went out a long ways around.
Mm-hmm. How long was the school here?
Well, some of the first ones were about 3 months, 5 months. Then when we had 6 months, we had a long-term school.
How come they were just 3 months long?
That's all the money they had to pay a teacher.
Hmm. How many years did you go through school?
I graduated from 8th grade in that same school.
Hmm. Go to high school?
No, I had some high school work, but
After high school, what did you do? After the 8th grade, I'm sorry.
well, I was around there working,
What kind of work?
herding cows,
Mm-hmm.
carrying water for the chickens, and the different utilities we needed. The house, we had to carry our wash water
How far do you have to carry it?
quite a ways uphill.
Tell me about doing laundry.
Well, that seems like on the washboard.
Yeah.
I did that a lot,
Tell me about it.
helping.
Mm-hmm. Like, how did you heat the water and...
Oh, we heated water in the washboard. Have you seen a washboard?
No? What is it?
Well, it's got so long, and I don't just how much water it held, but it was enough to have enough hot water to do our laundry.
Mm-hmm. What kind of soap did you use?
Well, my mother made good homemade soap.
Did you help her?
Well, probably, I don't recall any particular time.
Mm-hmm. How do you make soap?
Well, with different kinds of fats, like hog fat. And she made some with beef tallow,
Mm-hmm.
and it floated, good as ivory soap.
Did she use store-bought lye, or did she make her own lye?
She used a Lewis lye.
Mm-hmm. Didn't use a hot lopper then? An ash hopper?
No, she didn't.
Okay.
Well, that'd have to be with wood ashes because we didn't have much wood. We didn't have wood out there.
Okay. Do you remember World War I?
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember.
What do you remember about it?
Well, I remember that our school teacher was a young lady, and I believe she was 17. And I remember that her, the different ones of her friends, the young men, had to go away to war.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very sad that day after they had to leave.
Were there any organized projects in the school to support the war effort?
The war effort. Well, possibly some of the older ladies did knitting, making sweaters and socks.
What about Armistice Day?
Armistice Day. I don't particularly remember just exactly how to tell that.
Mm-hmm. Was there a celebration in school when the armistice was signed?
I don't really recall just what we did.
Okay. Tell me about the dust storms out here,
Dust storms.
the 1930s.
Well, one of the first ones that was so severe was an electrical storm, and my parents were gone. My sister and I were home, and they had gone to a funeral and for our grandmother, and they were down by Enid. That was in 1933, the last part of January. And we did chores. Where things were you touching, you could see electric call it, some kind of light or
So
something.
static electricity or sparks or?
But it didn't set anything fire.
Yeah. Were you here for Black Sunday? When the big black duster came in?
Yes, I was.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was a very nice day. And it was the 14th of April. My nephew was 2 weeks old. And he still is liberal. He's an electrician, independent electrician. And that day, it's a beautiful day, and there were several people who came to their house to see the new boy and visit. One of the uncles said, I believe there is a storm coming from the north. And some of my cousins were out on a rabbit drive for that day. They said that dust came right on over, and the children went out for the rabbit drive. They'd drive the rabbits and kill them. And but I don't think anybody got lost, but many cars were grounded from that electricity and the dust on that day.
How long did that storm last?
Oh, till it came up along in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock, and you couldn't see very far. Some people were frightened, but I don't know. I didn't think about it then. I just thought, well, no, if it just doesn't get cold, we get too cold. That was about all that bothered me, but I didn't know just what would happen.
How did you breathe in that dust storm?
I'm still breathing.
What kind of games did you play as a little girl?
We didn't have any swings. We didn't have any trees to swing in. We didn't have any swings. We didn't. Games. Different kind of games. And we read books.
This is September 13th, 1984.
That's it.
I'm Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Tom and Judy. Sir, where were you born?
Where?
Yes, sir.
Here in the southeast corner of Beaver County, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
September 21st, 1896.
Who is your father?
Thomas J. Judy. T.J. Judy.
And your mother?
Adelaide V. Judy. Her name was Wood to begin with.
Wood, okay. Where were your parents from?
My mother's from Virginia. The father from Kentucky.
What kind of work did your father do?
He's a cattleman.
Cattleman. When did they come to Oklahoma?
1886.
They settled in Beaver County?
Yeah.
How come they came to Oklahoma?
Well, it's kind of a long history. The mother was in Virginia, the father in Kentucky. They were born just before the Civil War. Both armies went back and forth through the country. The mother's father was in the rebel army, and the father's father in the Union Army, his brother in the Confederate Army. Everything was just in a turmoil after the war. Both armies had been across their farms. They were all taking their horses, cattle. There wasn't any future ahead for them there. mother's people moved to Missouri. The father came to Missouri. That's where he met my mother. They were married there. There wasn't much to do in Missouri. They went to Texas for a while, down around Wichita Falls, and came up to Kansas when this country opened down in here in 1886. They came here. They were down in the southeast part of the county on Kiowa Creek.
Did they set up a ranch?
No, they tried to farm. Farming was a failure. And my father went to work for, well, they freighted old buffalo bones to Dodge City and hauled freight back for country stores.
What did they do with the buffalo bones?
Well, they killed buffalo all over this country, killed them off, and the bones were, killed them off for the hides, and the bones were thick all over the country. They could haul them to Dodge. They were sent somewhere for fertilizer, soil fertilizer, and that, to get enough, made 90 miles up there, at $5 for a load of bone, and haul something back for the stores and ranches. Went on that way, then got a job buying cattle for some man east of here, bought them on a commission, and saved the money and buy a few cattle of his own. And finally got into the cattle business. And do you want to follow anything else they did?
Yeah, tell me about, how was a cattle drive organized? How does it work?
Well, they'd get a herd together and decide, know where they were taking. They'd have a wagon, all the supplies, bedding for the men, and they'd have a herd of horses, they call it remuda, and have extra horses for the men, and the wagon would take off and try to have the herd follow it. And the boss go ahead and pick out a suitable campground for them for the night, and they'd have to cook some kind of a supper for them, and herd would have to be herded during the night. Men would have to guard it all night. They'd take turns about, probably 2 men on guard. And they'd, at a certain time, one of them come in to wake other guards, they'd take over, and they'd try to be ready to graze the cattle a while early in the evening, and be ready to take off early in the morning, so that day after day.
What would they be guarding the cattle from at night?
Keep from scattering, going back home. No fences,
Yeah.
nothing. Didn't have corrals they put them in.
How many head of cattle would be on the cattle drive?
Well, that depends. Sometimes just a limited number for taking it to market somewhere. Those old time drives, the time I was born, my father said that generally had 2,500, 2,000. They tried to take bigger herds, but they had trouble finding water or grazing places for them, so they cut it down to not more than 2,500.
Where were they driving the cattle to?
Well, those that came out of Texas, and most of them were going north to some shipping point.
What, Dodge City or?
Dodge City was one, and some were on East Caldwell, Kansas. Was one point. Earlier than that, they drove on into Kansas to Atchison, Kansas.
How many men would be on a cattle drive?
How many riders?
Yeah.
Well, it depended on the number of size of the herd. His father said that generally, eight, as many as 8, tried to have that many.
And what were their different jobs? What were their duties?
Well, they got the cattle strung out, started, they try to keep them in a long line, some riders on each side, see that the cattle didn't leave the herd, keep them moving towards their destination, and also to see that outside cattle didn't break into the herd.
What about strays? What would they do about?
Well, most generally they're somewhere they didn't want to let the strays in. Sometimes along the road there'd be a man appointed by the local cattlemen to look the herd over the strays and cut them out, try to leave them on that range and get them back to their owner.
What about the men that brought up the end of the cattle herd? What were they called?
Well, cowboys, cowhands, riders.
Was that the dusty job behind the herd?
Oh, those that drove the drags,
Yeah.
that's a dusty job.
What about the cook and the chuck wagon?
Well, he is an important man, but he did all his cooking out in campfires. They had stretch a fly, as they called it, a big canvas over the side of the wagon that make kind of a shelter, but the fire was outside. And they had a Dutch oven. You've seen Dutch ovens, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Cook in Dutch ovens, boil coffee, potatoes, beef, potatoes, coffee with the biscuits, sourdough biscuits. Carried that sourdough with them, keep adding to it.
What would they burn for fuel to cook?
Oh, if they could, they'd get wood. And every time they see any wood they could get, why they'd get it. They couldn't, they'd use cow chips. They tried to have some wood carried underneath the wagon, carry a cowhide, had kindling and wood in that, some that'd be dry, so they at least get a fire started. And gather any decent wood they could get. But a lot of the country, like through here, settlers used up nearly all the trees and wood. Didn't look then like it does now. Everything was bare, except around people's homes, be trees there. Cow chips was the main fuel I can first remember.
What would they do in case of a stampede?
Well, they try to follow the herd, and then after they kind of ran down, first they try to circle them if they could, so they wouldn't go too far from the starting point. And if they could get them circled, they'd get to milling, and finally slow themselves down. But if they kept going, they'd run for several miles before they retired. And I guess the wagon would try to follow up and get to them. start over. But they sure hated to have a stampede. If it broke away once, it got to where it was a habit with it. They keep trying.
What would cause a stampede?
Oh, lightning, thunder is one thing, or a coyote show up and howl. My father said that caused them a lot of trouble. Coyote show up off